Kat Ramos is the Red Wolf Education and Outreach Coordinator for the NCWF, so I'm going to hand it over to her.
Yeah, awesome. Hi, y'all. I am so sorry for all of the delays today. The technology hybrid is a new one for me, so thank you so much for your patience. As that said, my name is Katerina Ramos. I am the Red Wolf Education and Outreach Coordinator. You can absolutely call me Kat. My name is a mouthful. And so today we're going to talk about my very, very favorite topic, which is the most endangered canid in the world, the red wolf. And so the first thing I'd love to talk with is seeing what everyone's knowledge of red wolves is. And I'm so sorry to our virtual crew. You're not gonna be able to answer these questions, but does everyone know what a red wolf is? Do we all know? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah, all right. So I always love starting off my programs about what a red wolf is because red wolves are such an unknown species. In fact, a lot of my tour has been with people not knowing that red wolves even exist, let alone that their only wild population exists in North Carolina. And so typically when we think of wolves, we think of the gray wolf, which is honestly anywhere between 80 to 120 pounds. The red wolf, however, is considered an intermediate or middle-sized canid, where they are anywhere between 42 to 84 pounds. So they're not that big. They are most notably known for the reddish brown, tan, gray color mixed in. So as you can see from my picture here, and of course of 22-25, there's a lot of mixtures in how those red wolves can look. Most notably though, you'll see there's a nice little reddish colorization on the back of the legs and in the back of the ears as well. That is pretty indicative of the red wolf. They also have yellow or brown eyes. Some pictures and some wolves have a bit of a green hue to their eyes, which is pretty cool, but it's typically yellow or brown. Really fun fact, wild canids do not have blue eyes. That is a domestic dog trait. So if you ever see a wild canid and has blue eyes, most likely it is bred with a domestic dog. The most distinguishing traits about red wolves and ways that we are able to identify them is by their really, really long legs. Fish and Wildlife Service loves to say that they are walking on stilts in the wild, which is fair, they're very leggy. They're really big feet and they're rounded ear tips, and that's going to be an important fact later on. So the age-old question, how did they become endangered? And so there's a couple of things that happened. We're going to start off before we had European settlement. Before European settlement, we had red wolves. Okay, sorry. Laser pointers, me, I have a short attention span. Anyways, we used to have red wolves all across the southeast central portion of the United States. So if we look here on my presentation, this is the most southern point of New York here, all the way down the coast into Florida, and then all the way across into Texas and Oklahoma. So they were considered the top canid predator in this region of the United States. Gray wolves do not reach all the way out here. It's just the red wolves. And so when we had European settlement, there was a couple of things that ended up happening. And the first thing was that European settlers stepped foot onto the United States and went, I don't like these predators. I don't want them. And they decided to put forward programs called predator extermination programs. And what these, okay, cool. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm like,
We're next to the fire.
should we be concerned? And so what these European settlers decided to do was put forward programs called predator extermination programs, which sound exactly what they are. They are programs based around the predator escape. Our early settlers looked at the red wolf and really thought, I don't need that. I could be the top predator, which is famous last words. And so what they do is you could go out and harvest a predator, bring that predator's harvested body into an office and go, money, please, if you're a Parks and Rec fan, and they will go and get paid out for these animals. People were making entire livings off of harvesting predators. And so you could do this as much as you wanted. The whole purpose of this program was just eradication. You just continue to go, zero regulation behind it. The other thing that started happening is that, much to the disappointment of my own family, our settlers started having families and their kids grew up. And unfortunately, kids like to move out of the house. Personally, I'm really sick and tired of having my own house. I'd like to go back to mom and dad. Or mom. That being said, as kids grew up and moved out of the house, they wanted to go and build their own houses. And then, of course, when you have your own house, you need a road that goes from your house to mom and dad's house because you had to go back and have them do your laundry or something. As this was happening, you started having roads develop between mom and dad's house, the kid's house, and then your house with the general store, and then it kept on building and branching out. And we kept on developing and developing this land. And soon enough, you started bumping into Dollar Generals and Walmarts every 5 minutes. As we continued to develop out this land, it started doing something to our environment. If we go back to this slide here, making sure that our Zoom folks catch up. If we go back to this slide here, if we think about the population, the human population in this region of the United States, this is the most densely populated portion of the United States. You have Atlanta, you have Raleigh, you have literally Washington, D.C., all of these heavily populated areas. And so with all this development, we started experiencing this breakage of habitat. And so what we call that is habitat fragmentation. So those of you that are going to take your SAT, habitat, land, fragmentation, to break up. With that, this is a super important thing that hurt red wolves pretty bad. The reason why is because an average red wolf pack can hold anywhere between 30 to 80 square miles of territory. And again, this is a heavily developed portion of the United States. It's where our first colonies were. We have a lot of people out here. So we have a lot of broken habitat. The other thing is that red wolves don't like being near people. They are very shy and elusive animals. Even under human care, they just do not have any interest in being near people. And so with all of this population, all of this habitat fragmentation, and then of course the predator extermination, it really hurt the red wolves. The other thing that was brought forward with our early settlers was a negative public perception. So, how many of you have heard of Little Red Riding Hood, the Big Bad Wolf? Yeah, it's the most common children's story that we tell. That and the Three Little Pigs, all of these different kinds of versions of these stories, with the main point being that wolves are scary, confrontational animals. This is so deeply rooted into our society that it still exists in present day. So if you're a big Disney fan like I am, Beauty and the Beast, Belle gets attacked by wolves. Frozen, Anna and Sven get attacked by wolves. Game of Thrones, for those of you that are into fantasy, wolves are this terrifying, confrontational creature to be a menacing force in that society. This is pretty common, that the idea is that wolves are going to eat you, they're going to eat me, they're going to eat the cows, they're going to eat our pets, they're going to eat grandma, what have you. And so people still, to this day, believe that wolves are this animal that's just going to attack you and hurt you and be a cause of fear in your community. And so, as all of these were happening, habitat fragmentation, more population growth, people wanted to remove the red wolves, our populations got smaller and smaller and smaller until they reached this little area here in Texas and Louisiana in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Now, I'm a dork. Which means you all are going to get conservation history, because I believe very firmly that we should all know how far conservation has come. And then, we should know why we're at the point that we're at. So, previous to 1967, when Fish and Wildlife Service looked at endangered species, they only looked at birds. They were operating under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which was they were looking at bald eagles, and they were looking at the red-crowned crane and multiple waterfowl species. In fact, the National Wildlife Refuge System was originally established for waterfowl sanctuary in 1903 for Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was super determined to protect wildlife. Super awesome president in conservation. And so it wasn't until 1967 when the US government put in place the Endangered Species Preservation Act. And the Endangered Species Preservation Act was an act that recognized endangered species as vertebrates. So only vertebrates were listed, which meant your reptiles, your amphibians, your bony fishes, your birds, and your mammals. And so with your mammals, there was 14 mammals originally listed on this Endangered Species Preservation Act. The red wolf was one of those species. And the gray wolf and the Indiana bat and the mountain lion, but red wolves. And so with that, that act was then later adopted into the Endangered Species Act of 1973, in which we currently operate under to this day. So if you do the math, it's 52 years of Endangered Species Act. The red wolf was then grandfathered into the Endangered Species Act. And the Endangered Species Act covers all flora and fauna that are endangered or at risk of becoming extinct. And so in 1973, Fish and Wildlife Service looked at the red wolf population and went, oh, this might go extinct if we don't do something. And so what they decided to do is they decided to capture as many red wolves as possible, if I would stop clicking buttons, using foothold traps. I'll go ahead and show it to our fun friends over here. This is my foothold trap. Typically, people are very scared of these traps because they are normally thinking of the bear traps that have the big claws. This is not the same. This trap has a rubber mouth. And truthfully, this is still the way that we capture wild canids to this day. These traps have a very minimal risk of actually injuring the animal. So much so that it is more effective to use this and safer to use this than to dart an animal in the wild. And so I brought the broken one with me because my CEO does not like when I set this off on myself. But a really fun fact about the human hand. The human hand takes about 5 pounds of pressure to break a bone in it. I know this because I box. That's why. Not because I have brothers. With that being said, typically I set this off on myself. I can go, drop my hand in, it'll snap on my hand. Yeah, it pinches, but it does not hurt. It is very, very rare that we have actual trapping injuries from these foothold traps. So, Fish and Wildlife Service went, tried to capture as many red wolves as possible using these foothold traps, and they caught over 400 canids. Where am I at? There I am. They caught 400 canids. Now I say canids because it could be a red wolf, it could be a coyote, or it could be a red wolf coyote hybrid. And something that I didn't note earlier about the red wolf losing its territory and losing its populations is that as it became harder and harder for red wolves to live on the landscape and find other red wolves, the coyote was kind of there, ready to step on in. And so we are in a small town, we're in Whipple. So imagine for you that the only people that you could date or be around was just in Whipple. And so there's going to be a population of people that you're going to be willingly going on a date with. You're like, yeah, absolutely, you're cute, sure. And then there's going to be a population that you wouldn't want to touch with a 20-foot pole. For the red wolf, with how much of their population they lost and not being able to find other red wolf mates, they were only left with that population that they wouldn't typically touch with a 20-foot pole. And so desperation calls for desperate measures. And so they started hybridizing with coyotes to try to at least survive on the landscape. And so from the 400 canids captured down in Texas and Louisiana, only 17 were determined to be red wolves. 14 of those 17 were determined to be the least amount related from one another and were brought into captivity to begin the very first captive breeding program. And this was very successful. This was the first time we have ever had a captive breeding program for canids. And so with this, they continued to grow the population under human care to the point where when red wolves were declared extinct in the wild in 1980, they had over 60 red wolves under human care. Which, like, woo, look at us, amazing Endangered Species Act. We managed to keep them from going extinct. Look at us. However, the Endangered Species Act does state that you have to recover a species to the point where they no longer need human intervention. Some would say that captivity is human intervention. Semantics. So, Fish and Wildlife Service then went back to the drawing board, looked at the red wolf area that they used to be found in the historic range, and they started thinking, what if we tried reintroducing the red wolf. And remind you, how many of you have heard of the Yellowstone Wolf Recovery Program? You haven't? Good, because wanna know why? Red wolves are so much better, and we're first. The Yellowstone Wolf Program started in 1995. It is the most notable reintroduction program because of how its success was. The Red Wolf Recovery Program is quite literally the backbone of how they were so successful. We started in 1987. We developed all of the ways that they were able to recover the gray wolf in Yellowstone. We're cool. Again, we're so historic and no one knows. Anyhow, so Fish and Wildlife Service looked at the historic range of red wolves and ultimately settled on eastern North Carolina to introduce red wolves back into this historic range. So the first reason is because, hey, it's in the historic range. Perfect. The second is that they actually chose Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge specifically. And so if we look at Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, it is actually a peninsula and a really ideal location for Fish and Wildlife Service to attempt something that had never been attempted before. A peninsula is a landmass that has 3 sides covered with water and then one that is connected to the actual mainland. This made it ideal because it meant that there was one exit point for the red wolves, which meant that they had a whole bunch of control over the population, but still had the opportunity of letting it be completely wild. The other thing is that Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, which was established in 1984 and was about 150,000 acres. It's more now. They got more land. But this is super important because this is a national wildlife refuge that is established for wildlife and habitat and protecting it. The other thing about eastern North Carolina, and specifically in our 5-county area here, is that we have multiple national wildlife refuges that are managed for wildlife and habitat. So we have the Coast and Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, Mount Mesquite, Swan Porter, all of these great national wildlife refuges. The other thing is that we also have a lot of publicly owned land that is managed for wildlife and habitat. We have lots of game land, we have lots of parks, awesome. And then again, we have a lot of privately owned land that, you guessed it, is managed for wildlife and habitat. And so with all of that information, having national wildlife refuges, state-owned land, publicly owned land, all of this managed for wildlife and habitat creates an entire continuum of habitat, which is amazing. We call that habitat connectivity, in which you have habitat that is connected. So another SAT prep word, habitat, land, connectivity, to connect together. And so this is important because like I said, the red wolf loves, I did it again. The red wolf, I'm just gonna like, chug it. The red wolf loves its space. The average red wolf pack has 30 to 80 square miles of territory. And I didn't mention this earlier, but an average red wolf pack is just a family group. It's mom, dad, yearlings, and then that year's pups. That's all it is to it. Very, very small, but holding a lot of territory. And so, habitat connectivity, perfect. The other thing, I live in Terrell County. We think Whiteville is small. Whiteville, White. I am not from the south, I'm from the north. I'm sorry, I'm a Yankee. So, Terrell County is pretty small. I live in Terrell County. There's less than 3,000 people in my county. I don't have a fast food restaurant.
Yay. Yay.
Yeah, honestly, really great for like my health, really great for my bank account. However, now that I've been on this tour, I'm like, oh my God, let's get Burger King. Horrible for my health. I need to like work out for like at least 6 weeks to work off all of these calories that I have. But there's not a lot of people. 3,000 people, less than 3,000 people in Carroll County, less than 3,000 people in Hyde County. There's literally, I think, one stretch of road that allows houses on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. There is not a lot of people. I do not have a nightlife. My entire hobbies is gardening, knitting, and watching movies. Such a social life. So, with that, that's also important because again, red wolves don't like being near people. They're super shy, they're super elusive. They just want to keep their space. Awesome. Lots of land, not a lot of people. This is looking great. The next thing that Fish and Wildlife Service was looking at, and possibly the most important thing, was that they were looking for an absence of coyotes for reintroduction. And at this point in time, in 1987, we did not have coyotes in eastern North Carolina. I mean, present day, they're in 49 out of the 50 states. Not exactly the best, But at this point in time, in 1987, they were not in North Carolina. Who wants to guess which state they're not in?
Hawaii.
Man, every single program I've given to this tour has been everywhere me to like, of course it's Hawaii. And I like want someone to confidently say Alaska. It is so much fun when people are like, yes, it's Alaska. I know it. There's no way. And you're like, yeah. Everyone's so smart. So anyways, on September 14th, 1987, Fish and Wildlife Service released 4 pairs of red wolves onto Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And in the very next year, they had the first litter born in the wild since we did being declared extinct in the wild. And this program was considered a huge success. That not only were they able to hold territory, but Fish and Wildlife Service started developing all these different techniques in order to help reintroduce the species. So they learned how to use acclimation pens, how to do captive wolf reintroductions, pup fostering. Exactly, so cute. I can't. And island propagation. So all of these things mixed together, this population continued to grow, and it grew and it grew and it grew into the early 2010s, where we had over 120 red wolves in the wild. Present day, we have a known population, which is a population with these beautiful, bright, orange collars, so fashionable, of 16. And an estimated population of 17 to 19. Which always begs the question of what happened. And the biggest thing that I can say is that coyotes started moving into eastern North Carolina. And so if we look at my little infographic here, I have a nice little graphic of a coyote and a red wolf right next to each other. We can clearly see, by seeing them side by side, that there's a very big difference between the two species. Not only is the coyote shorter and have smaller feet, but it also is a lot more of an angular or narrow face, which is where that rounded ear tip comment comes from for the red wolf. Because if we look, coyotes are very sharp, whereas red wolves are very rounded. And so when we look at this graphic, it's very clear. Yes, there's a difference between red wolves and coyotes. However, as coyotes started to move into eastern North Carolina, people really didn't want coyotes on their land. And a really fun fact is that if you're looking at this species independently and not side by side, it is incredibly hard to tell the difference between a red wolf and a coyote. And then you may be thinking, well, Kat, they have collars. At this point in time, we did not have orange collars on red wolves. We had black collars. So you're a landowner, you don't want coyotes on your land, you see a canid, and you're like, you're out of here. And you end up shooting a red wolf that has a black collar. And this happened, and this was a huge, and still is a huge issue for our red wolf population. Gunshot mortality continued to wreak havoc on our packs and dismantle them. And then as we started having gunshot mortality and our packs being dismantled and it becoming harder for red wolves to find other red wolves, you know, that coyote looking good again. Kind of like that ex that comes around and you're like, oh my God, I guess I'm a little desperate. Sure. No, no, do not settle. Settling is a no. Anyhow, so as they were having hybrids happen again, they were having pumps together, people started looking at the red wolf and going, you know, how is the red wolf a species if they can hybridize with coyotes? And their offspring that they have with coyotes can also have offspring. Which then kind of put a screeching halt to the red wolf program, because a really fun fact about the Endangered Species Act and being covered under the Endangered Species Act is that there's a requirement to be a species. And with everyone questioning whether or not the red wolf was a species, there was about 5 years while they assessed the validity of the red wolf in this present day as a species. And it wasn't until 2019 when the National Academy of Sciences came out with a report that said, yes, the red wolf is a species. It is so much so a species that it doesn't fall under the gray wolf category. And so typically when we think of wolves, we think of the gray wolf, the Arctic wolf, timber wolf, Mexican wolf, all of these different kinds of wolves. Those all fall under the gray wolf species. So they're all considered subspecies of gray wolves. Red wolves are completely their own. And so if we look at the wild canids that exist in the United States, you have your gray wolves, your red wolves, and your coyotes. Canis lupus, Canis rufus, Canis latrans. And then whoever is going to judge me for my Latin pronunciation, I'm sorry, it's horrible. Don't judge me. And so with this, at this point in time in 2019, when this information came out, we went from 120 red wolves to less than 20 red wolves. We reached as low as 7 red wolves in 2021. And so we have gunshot mortality, we have hybridization. There was about 5 years where the only thing that could happen for red wolf recovery was monitoring. The other thing is that in the last decade, we have seen a huge uptick in people visiting the Outer Banks for their vacation, which is great. However, people typically take Highway 64 to get to their vacation. I'm gonna assume that y'all don't vacation out in the Outer Banks because you have literally every other beach down here. I like asked it yesterday and I was like, why would you actually? Why would you travel like super far away to the Outer Banks? But if you look, Highway 64 cuts straight through all of the red wolf recovery area or Eastern North Carolina red wolf area. We have an exuberant amount of vehicle strike mortality for red wolves. And this is a huge issue. As we're starting to get more traction to the Outer Banks, more and more people are speeding their way to their vacation. I live out there. I drive my speed limit for many reasons. I've been passed by someone going 80 miles per hour. And a really fun fact, we're gonna forget red wolves. Who needs that? That's the only reason why I have a job. But if we were to look at Eastern North Carolina, we are known for such a cool amount of different kinds of wildlife. We have a great biodiversity of reptiles, amphibians, birds, all of these cool things. But one of the cool things that we're also known for is our black bear. We have the world's largest population of black bear, the densest population of black bear, and the largest black bear. We have the world record for largest harvested black bear of 880 pounds. That is not an outlier. I have seen black bears that I'm like pretty sure are heavier than that. There's one that steps around on Alligator River. He takes his first step and goes through. Fat bears. We got some fat bears out there. That is actually a huge economic driver for our area as well. People will come to Eastern North Carolina to get a trophy black bear. Economics, ecotourism, anything at this point. We're a very low income county area. But so, black bears. You're driving to your vacation, you're speeding, you know, you want to go and get your tan, get excited, all that kind of stuff, enjoy the Outer Banks. And you're driving through Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, and it's typically at 55, but you're like, I'm going 80. I'll just deal with the ticket. I got a ticket the other day. I'm really sad about it. I'm trying not to be sad about it. I'm so sad about it. Anywho, so you're driving, you're going 80 miles per hour. I'll just deal with the ticket. And then a black bear jumps out in front of you because for whatever reason, they like to sprint into the road. And does anyone in here drive a Ford Bronco? Good. I hope no one in the chat drives a Ford Bronco because I'm about to talk a lot of smack on it. Ford Broncos have the worst crash rating I have ever seen in my entire life. They hit something going 35 miles per hour and the entire car goes. So imagine hitting an 800-pound black bear going 80 miles per hour. Even if you're not in a Ford Bronco, you're still gonna get hurt. And people quite literally lose their lives to hitting our wildlife out in Eastern North Carolina. I really hope no one drives a Ford Bronco on Zoom. I'm so
the
sorry.
chat is going insane right now.
I'm gonna get in so much trouble. And so, not only is our vehicle mortality a huge issue for red wolves and a huge concern, but it's also a human concern. You don't want people losing their lives when they're just trying to get to the Outer Banks. You want people to get there safely. And so with all of this, that is one of our leading causes of red wolf mortality to this day. And so I just said a lot of depressing things. So much that's going against the red wolves: public perception, hybridization, gunshot mortality, vehicle mortality. What is happening now? Well, since we had the report come out in 2019, there was a couple of things that changed. First being multiple nonprofit organizations started to step forward and help with education outreach. Hi, I am the Red Wolf Education and Outreach Coordinator for North Carolina Wildlife Federation. And so not only did NCWF step forward and start working harder on our education outreach, but other nonprofit organizations like Red Wolf Coalition, Wildlife Network, and Defenders of Wildlife have also upped their ante in education outreach. The negative public perception for people out in Eastern North Carolina is a huge driver as to why the red wolves are getting so much flack. The other thing is that the coyote sterilization program was able to resume, meaning there is a partnership between U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission that they have a coyote sterilization program to help with hybridization, and we'll talk more about that later. We also have a Pray for the Pack program. And so this is a partnership with NCWF and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that offers a cost share habitat improvement program for the locals in Eastern North Carolina. And essentially what happens is that if you own a piece of land near Red Wolf territory in Eastern North Carolina, you can possibly get a cost share for doing your habitat improvement so much as you tolerate red wolves on your land. And so depending on how much you support red wolves on your land, you can get anywhere between a 50 to 85% cost share. We have over 20,000 acres enrolled into this program. So we're creating even more habitat connectivity and tolerance for the red wolves. The other thing is that after 2019, after that report came out, in early 2020, Fish and Wildlife Service started fitting red wolves with bright orange collars. Does anyone in here hunt? That's
But I'm used to color like that. No, I mean, on a hunting dog, because we're hunting.
okay. So here's a question, especially to our younger folks. I want to know: do you guys know why we use orange?
Because it's easy to spot.
It is easy to spot, but why do you have to wear orange when you go hunting with your parents or independently? I don't know.
Cause it reminds them to when red wolves they put on it, I guess it'll remind them that they come in.
How about this? So when you wear orange when you go out hunting, what does that tell other hunters about you?
Not shooting.
Yeah. So when we put orange collars on red wolves, what do you think that means?
Not shooting.
Exactly. And so putting bright orange collars on red wolves helps considerably, and not only in people identifying them and knowing the difference between them and coyotes, but it also helps hunters to know, hey, you cannot shoot me. And if you willingly shoot me, you're admitting to a lot of things that you should not be doing as a hunter. And so there's a lot more accountability with having these bright orange collars. And that has reduced our gunshot mortality quite a bit. It's still up there, but in the last 2 years, we haven't actually had a gunshot mortality for the red wolves because of those collars. And then I also talked about how we have a lot of vehicle collisions with red wolves. Wow, this past year, North Carolina Department of Transportation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission came together and submitted a grant request for highway crossings on Highway 64. I am so happy to announce that as of December of 2024, Eastern North Carolina is getting allocated the funds and granted this grant to be able to install wildlife crossings on Highway 64 on Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge, which is super, super exciting. Granted, we have to wait for those grant allocations to come through, and then the engineers go and look at what's possible, all that kind of stuff. But the fact that we were selected as one of these grant recipients is amazing work for our wildlife and people out in Eastern North Carolina. Also with the report that came out is that Fish and Wildlife Service was able to resume their methods of recovery. And so the most important method of recovery that we have for the red wolf, and technically never had stopped because it existed under human care for the safe facilities, is our captive breeding program. There are 51 facilities that house red wolves under human care. And so this is done through the Safe American Red Wolf Program. They just changed their acronym again. But this is managed through the XC2 population manager, Chris Lasher. And so we have about 270 red wolves that exist under human care. And in this last season, we attempted 28 breeding pairs for 2024-2025 breeding season. There's about a 35 to 48% success rate with having pups from the breeding pairs. So we're expecting around, what, 12-ish wolves, 12 pairs in order to have litters. This is super important because the captive breeding program is quite literally the backbone of red wolf recovery and genetics. When I mentioned earlier that we brought 14 red wolves into human care to begin the very first captive breeding program, that means every single red wolf that you see to this day is related to one of those 14 individuals. It is incredibly easy to have inbreeding with only 14 individuals, and our captive breeding program is intense. They maintain an 87.89% genetic diversity across those 14 founding lines. They expect to maintain a genetic diversity over 82% for the next 100 years. And this is very specific. They meet every single year. They have an annual summit in which they decide who in the captive program gets to have offspring to better the genetic diversity. And essentially, they have a room like this. You know those like big sticky note papers that you can get? They have 51 of those lining the rooms, all of them labeled with their facilities. And then we have additional sticky notes. We have blue sticky notes that represent boy red wolves. And then we have pink sticky notes that represent girl red wolves. And what ends up happening is Chris Lasher stands in front of a room and goes, okay, I want to take 2292F, which is a female, and I want to take 2445M, and I want to see if they can breed. And someone with so much more intelligence and brain cells than I is a geneticist, sits down and types into her computer and goes, and she will let us know whether or not that this will be a good pairing and maintain genetic diversity. And so she'll look up from her computer and either go, yep, we should do that, or absolutely not, that's a horrible idea. And so 2292, 2445, yep, that's a good idea. They slap them down at their facility, and in this case, it's the Red Wolf Center. They take a red marker, it has to be red, and they draw a big heart around them. We call that our Red Wolf matchmaking for the year. And so we made 28 of those breeding pairs for this season. The biggest constraint for our captive population is space. And so the SAFE program is constantly looking at facilities wanting to convert some sort of space into a red wolf habitat to help support red wolf captive breeding. So with that, we have all these captive wolves. We need to figure out to bring them back into the wild, because that's the whole purpose of the Endangered Species Act. And so we do captive wolf reintroductions. I will say it is not the most effective way of adding red wolves into the wild. However, it is the only way to grow our population when you do not have a breeding pair or pups being born on the landscape. And from about 2018 to 2022, we did not have litters born in the wild. So when we reached as low as 7, Fish and Wildlife Service was diligently on releasing captive born individuals. Now, like I said, it is not the most effective for a couple of reasons. It is very hard for red wolves that are born and raised in captivity to adjust to life in the wild. And Fish and Wildlife Service tried really hard to get them to be ready for wild living. They use acclimation pens. This is the acclimation pen. I'm trying real hard to not just, okay, this one first. They use acclimation pens, and acclimation pens are exactly what they seem like. They're giant pens that they house the red wolf in for a couple of months to get used to the environment without all the stresses of the environment. And so after a captive wolf has been in that captive pen, in that acclimation pen for a bit, they are released. And the hope is that they will go and establish territory or go hook up with a wild wolf and survive on the landscape. However, it is really, really hard for them to adjust. There's a lot of new things and they have to check them out. There's one huge driver or one huge obstacle for our captive reintroductions. Who wants to guess what it is?
Barbed wire. Barbed wire?
Nope.
Humans.
Humans in what capacity?
Say louder.
Cars.
Cars. Ding, ding, ding. You get 200 points. Welcome to Whose Line Is It Anyways? I'm a big fan of that show, sorry. So, cars are a huge, huge issue for our captive wolves. They do not know what a car is, and for whatever reason, they're like a moth drawn to a flame. They're like, I'm gonna check this out. And unfortunately, you only get one chance to figure out what a car does to you. So, Not the most effective way of introducing new individuals, but they have developed new ways to try to help the captive wolf survive. And one of those ways is they capture a wild wolf and they put him in the acclimation pen with this captive individual in the hopes that they will become a breeding pair. And what they aim for Fish and Wildlife Service is they'll capture the wild wolf during the courtship season, bring in this captive wolf, and then hope that they'll have a litter in the acclimation pen, and then they release them once those pups are mobile, which is around 6 weeks. This was actually really successful and is the reason why we have a Pungo pack. Pungo pack is a wild female and a captive male. They had a litter back in 2023. And they didn't end up having a litter last year, but he's still on the landscape. When they released him and her from the pen, she just kept on going, hey, come here. No, we're over here. Come on, get over here. And so she was basically guiding him around the landscape and telling him, hey, don't go near that road. We have to hunt in this field. We have pups, all right? We have things to do. And so she did a really great job. He's still on the landscape. He still gets caught. He just trips his way into traps, but he's doing really good on the landscape. So really great hope. We still consider them a breeding pair, hoping that they'll have another litter this season. The other way that we try to help our captive wolves adjusting into wild areas is that we use island propagation sites. Island propagation sites are exactly what they sound like. They are quite literally islands that do not have a lot of human presence or coyote presence. We used to have 4. We have 1 now because the rest were overrun by coyotes and humans. And so we have St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge. And so that is on the Gulf of Florida. And so this island isn't very big. It can hold about a single pack of red wolves, which is exactly what we want. What we'll end up doing is Fish and Wildlife Service will introduce 2 captive wolves onto this island in the hopes that they will be a breeding pair, or they'll bring a breeding pair already established. They'll have this breeding pair have a litter on the island, and that litter is raised in a wild setting. They learn how to hunt, they learn how to use the landscape, they've never known captivity. And those offspring will be the candidates to be translocated or moved to the wild population. Now, there are some captive wolves that just don't want to be on the island. And we do have some wolves that have what is called failure to thrive, in which they learn how to hunt. They're like, yeah, I'll hunt for about a week. And then they're like, wow, I don't want to do this anymore. And they go wait on someone's back porch. Not very good for public perception. There was one wolf that was released onto St. Vincent and then decided to swim his way to the shore. He was returned to captivity. Happens. Some are just happier in captivity. But there's a lot of wolves that have done great at adjusting onto St. Vincent. And actually, our breeding male in 2022, we introduced him from St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge to her, and they produced a litter. This was very iconic because 2225, I'm going to give you some background on her because I love her. 2225 originally was the last litter born in the wild in 2017. So she was born in 2017. Her mom was 1849. And when they were introducing 2323, or the male, to Alligator River from the island propagation site, they caught 1849, her mom. Because fun fact about 2225 is that she doesn't get caught. She likes to dig up her traps and go, wow, look at that, and then eat the food and go on her merry way. She is he is so notorious. It is hilarious. She's an awesome wolf. So they caught her mom, put her mom and 2323 into an acclimation pen together. And when they did that, they were really just hoping that he would get accepted into the pack and be able to move around. 2225 came visiting mom and was like, who do you have here, mom? I was like, I'm new. Is there someone new here? Oh my God. And so when they released 2323 in 1849 from the acclimation pen, he made a beeline straight to her. And in 2022, they had a litter of 6 on the landscape, which was the first litter born on the landscape since she was born. Amazing. Showed how great the island propagation site is. Unfortunately, he was then hit by a car in September of 2023 after siring a second litter with her. His offspring are still out on the landscape though, which is awesome. Pup fostering. I get really hyped about pup fostering. And it is because it is the cutest thing I've ever seen in my entire life, but also because it is one of the best ways of adding new red wolves into the wild. However, it is completely dependent on having breeding pairs in the wild. And so without breeding pairs in the wild, you can't do this. But when you do, what typically ends up happening is that if you have a litter that is born in the wild and a litter that is born in captivity at the same time, you are able to do pup fostering. And so what happens is Fish and Wildlife Service goes and looks for the females on the landscape during whelping season, which is spring. They'll track them multiple times a day to wait until they do what is called localization, day in and day out. Once they find that localization, they'll find the female and hope that she has a den with pups in it. If they find a den with pups in it, they will go, they'll process the pups, and they immediately pick up the phone and they call up Chris Lasher, the XC2 population manager of the captive red wolves, and go, hey, that was nice. And either Chris will go, oh my God, yes, or I'm so sorry. No. And it's really important that these pups are almost the exact same age for a couple of reasons. If they are the exact same age, say we do have a litter born in captivity at the same time as the wild litter, perfect. They will coordinate within the first 2 weeks of life to put captive pups into this wild den. This is super important because within the first 2 weeks of life of pups, whether it's from the wild or captive, they do not have their eyes open. And the mom has the strongest amount of maternal instinct. Meaning, if you take a pup from captivity, mom can't count. She goes, yeah, whatever, I had this many to begin with. I didn't lose a pup. I'm an awesome mom. Or you have your wild litter and mom still can't count. And she goes, you guys kind of smell weird, but you're mine. So what ends up happening is if there is a captive born litter at the same time as a wild born, they will identify how many pups can get fit into this wild litter. Because again, there's a lot of different things that have to go right for this to happen. And they will transport those pups or pup from that captive litter to the wild litter. In 2023, we transferred one singular pup from Tacoma, Washington. He flew private. Fancy. And he was put into a wild den, which was 2225s. She is an experienced mom and was able to accept that. Basically what they do is when they introduce this captive pup, they have them pee all over one another, the captive and the wild pups, and they leave it in the den. They will know if this is successful if mom moves the entire den and takes all the pups with her, or if she just raises all of the pups in that den. We won't know if it's successful unless she moves it, or we can go back when she moves again later on in their lives and see the footage. In 2023, we were able to do this. And we did foster a male pup into 2225's litter in 2023. Unfortunately, he stopped getting seen in July of 2023. We're not sure what happened to him, but it was really great because it means that pups are born or are raised by a wild individual, which means that they are taught the ropes of living on the landscape. They have a higher chance of survival other than just dealing with the typical ways of survival as offspring. So unfortunately, we didn't have the opportunity of pup fostering this last year, but it's still a really great method of recovery. It's something that Fish and Wildlife Service strives to do. The other thing that happens is we talked about vehicle mortality, we talked about gunshot mortality, introducing wolves, and then we also have to figure out, like I said, coyotes are in 49 out of the 50 states. They're not in Hawaii. So how do we combat hybridization when you still have a low red wolf population? You can't just go to a new place that doesn't have coyotes because it really doesn't exist. And so what Fish and Wildlife started doing with partnership with WRC is they started giving coyotes sterilizations. And this isn't your typical spay or neuter where you completely remove the reproductive organs. But this is the human equivalent of a tubal ligation or vasectomy, meaning that they still keep their reproductive organs, they just can't reproduce. And so we do this under this assumption called the placeholder theory. And the placeholder theory states that if you have an animal that has all of the drive and want to defend territory, but no way to act on that drive, they will just hold that territory until they are kicked off it. In the case of the coyote and red wolf, if you have a sterilized coyote on the landscape, it defends territory as much as it can, but has no way of utilizing that territory for its main goal, which is reproduction. So that means if a coyote is paired up with an intact coyote, so a sterilized is with an intact, they can't have pups. If a sterilized coyote is paired up with a red wolf, they're still not having pups. And so the last time that we actually detected a hybrid litter on the landscape was 2021. This has been incredibly effective in mitigating our hybridization risk for red wolves. And in fact, we have over 40 coyotes on the landscape that are sterilized. And the whole purpose is that as the red wolf population grows, they will kick coyotes out or kill them, which is exactly what we want. So sterilized coyotes are fit with beautiful white collars that definitely don't stay white for very long. People can still shoot them. It is still legal. We just encourage people not to because you're much more likely to have a better time with a sterilized coyote than a rampant coyote population. So again, let's have some good news. In 2024, after losing 23-23 in September, Fish and Wildlife Service mobilized and spoke with our captive population and went, okay, who's a good candidate to be released into the wild? And they ultimately settled on 2191. They put 2191 into an acclimation pen with one of 2225's daughters. Yes, I know, I'm saying a lot of numbers. I completely visualize them as a whole animals. And you guys are like, that's a lot of words. I promise you, it does get easier. But they put him into an acclimation pen with one of her daughters. When he was released in January from this acclimation pen, he immediately went to 2225 and was adopted into the pack. He did struggle to keep up with the pack because unfortunately everyone else in the pack learned from 2225 on how to avoid capture. He kept on stumbling into the traps. Fish and Wildlife Service got really worried. But when it came to whelping season, she had a litter of 8 and we figured out that he sired those 8 pups, which is amazing. This was super, super important because it meant that we did not lose a breeding year from 2225 or lose a breeding pair in the landscape. Unfortunately, none of those pups have been seen since June, but he is still on the landscape, still within that pack, and we're hoping that they'll have another litter this year. Sometimes pups just don't survive. It happens. A whole bunch of different things could happen. But this is really great news because we are so excited to know that we have a male on the landscape that is with our pack on Milltail and able to be a breeding individual. So really, really great news despite not having the pups anymore. So I always love to finish my programs talking about ways that you as individuals, as the public, can help the red wolf. Because a lot of the stuff that goes on for red wolf recovery has to be done by agencies. However, for us as people, we can do our part by talking about red wolves. There are many people, even in this state, that have no idea that red wolves exist or that the only wild population is here in Eastern. I'm so used to doing Eastern North Carolina. It's in Eastern North Carolina. So if you share information about red wolves, you introduce people to red wolves, you're able to tell them about the plight of red wolves, you will increase that advocacy. Because truthfully, if you don't know about the species, how can you advocate and support the species recovery? And you never know, you might introduce someone to their next favorite species. And so if you share information about red wolves, you can share it from NCWF, you can share it from Fish and Wildlife Service, anyone that's involved with red wolf recovery. You could visit the Red Wolf Center or the National Wildlife Refuges that red wolves exist on. You can come visit me in Eastern North Carolina. I do have live stream cameras on my wolves and I'm hoping to have puppies. And then also supporting our ecotourism in Eastern North Carolina to help show that red wolves can benefit the public and help ease some of that animosity towards them. You can also join your local wildlife advocacy group. So Southeastern Swamp Stewards is a great organization to join and get involved with your community in creating more habitat on the land. You can also advocate for ethical wildlife observation and photography. Something that we've seen over the last couple of years is that people are really, really excited to get outside, get within wildlife, but not understand that wildlife needs their space to remain wild. We have seen a lot of habituation of our wildlife, especially on our national wildlife refuges, And so we recommend keeping at least 100 yards distance between you and wildlife to help them remain wild and free and keep you safe. You can also visit any of the locations that house red wolves under human care. And so in North Carolina, we have quite a few. We have the Carolina Tiger Rescue in Pittsburgh, Museum of Life and Science in Durham, which I believe has a breeding pair, the NC State University, which are not on display unfortunately, North Carolina Zoo, the Red Wolf Center, which, hey, look at that, these are my wolves. These are my breeding pair. They're very cute, they're very fun, they're really fun to watch on the cameras. The Dan Nicholas Nature Center, and then the Western North Carolina Nature Center, which did, I believe, sustain damage during Hurricane Helene, but I believe they fixed that. And so you can visit any of these facilities, support these facilities for red wolves.